The term Patient Zero is familiar to those who like to watch horror movies or thrillers about the zombie apocalypse. However, few people know that this concept was introduced after the case of Mary Mallon, an Irish cook who, being healthy, was a carrier of typhoid fever. Any epidemic has a starting point, the moment when the first person, under certain circumstances, became a carrier of infection capable of infecting other people. Mary Mallon, better known as Typhoid Mary, became the first patient zero in the history of world medicine. It was she who unwittingly caused an outbreak of typhoid fever in New York in the early 19th century. Mary Mallon was born in 1869 in Ireland, in County Tyrone. Outwardly, the baby looked absolutely healthy, but researchers believe that she was infected from birth. According to some reports, Mary's mother fell ill with typhoid fever during pregnancy, but there is no confirmation of this information. The girl grew up a strong, healthy child, did not complain about anything. When Mary was 15 years old, she and her family emigrated to the United States. Having got used to a new place, the girl decided to learn a profession, instead of looking for a husband, as was customary in those years, and she started working as a cook in rich families. By 1900, 31-year-old Mary had moved to New York State. In the small town of Mallon, a wealthy family took her to work, but something immediately went wrong. One by one, the family members began to get sick. No one thought to blame Mallon. She looked absolutely healthy, and it didn't make sense to poison employers. Her family paid her well. Nevertheless, local residents could not help but notice the fact that within 2 weeks of her arrival, typhoid fever patients appeared in the town, and panic began. Mary had no choice but to obey. A year later, in 1901, Mallon moved to Manhattan. Literally a week later, the family for which the girl started working became seriously ill. The owners suffered from diarrhea and fever, and their laundress died altogether. Then Mary went to work in the house of a local lawyer, but things didn't go well there either. 7 out of 8 family members caught typhoid fever. Mallon decided to stay to take care of the sick, not even suspecting that her presence nearby only worsens the course of the disease. In a short time, typhoid fever spread outside the lawyer's house. Mary's help was in vain, and she was forced to leave the owners. Again. In total, in the period from 1900 to 1905, she changed jobs 6 times, each time leaving behind a trace in the form of an outbreak of typhoid fever, often with a fatal outcome. In 1906, Mallon got a job as a cook in the family of New York banker Charles Henry Warren. At the end of the summer, the family rented a house on Long Island to enjoy the last sunny days, and Mary moved there with everyone. In just a week, from August 27 to September 3, 6 out of 11 households, including small children, fell ill with typhoid fever. This time Mallon decided not to pretend virtue and immediately went in search of a new job. Perhaps Mary would have continued to infect and literally kill people, if not for the case. The landlord of a house on Long Island was concerned about a sudden outbreak of typhoid fever. He understood that it would not be easy to rent the mansion from now on, and decided to figure out what was the source of the dangerous infection. To do this, the owner of the house hired a sanitary engineer, George Soper, to conduct an investigation. By a happy coincidence, the man, among other things, understood typhoid fever, as he had previously worked with similar cases. Soper enthusiastically took up the investigation, studied all the outbreaks of typhus in New York State over the past few years, drew parallels. Very soon he found out that all wealthy families, where a sharp incidence of a deadly disease was recorded, have one similarity among themselves, and this is Mary Mallon, the cook. Alas, by the time Soper found the girl, she was already working in a new family on Park Avenue and managed to infect the household. The daughter of the owners died, and 2 servants were hospitalized. George tried to convince Mary that she was a carrier of infection, offered to be examined, but apparently chose the wrong words. At that time in the USA, Irish immigrants were subjected to pressure. They were called slum dwellers, scum, for which the Irish woman attacked the uninvited guest with fists and categorically refused to hand over tests. Then Soper, realizing the seriousness of the situation, was forced to contact the New York State Department of Health. A woman doctor, Sarah Josephine Baker, was sent to Mallon for negotiations, but the cook did not make contact with her either. Mary claimed that not so long ago she was examined by a certain pharmacist who confirmed her good health. At that time, no one could imagine that a person who was not experiencing obvious ailments could be a carrier of the disease. However, the authorities clearly trusted the scientific data more than the cook's words, so very soon Mallon was arrested and sent to the prison hospital. At the prison hospital, Mary was thoroughly examined and found a focus of typhoid-like bacteria in her gallbladder. Doctors suggested Mallon to have an operation to remove the bladder, but she, confident in her rightness, refused surgical intervention. Nevertheless, during the court hearing, Mary admitted that she often neglected standard hygiene rules and, for example, did not wash her hands before cooking. The court considered this a weighty reason for punishment and sent Mallon to quarantine on birth.The Island near New York for 3 years. She sincerely considered herself innocent, was angry, and dreamed of getting out of prison as soon as possible. On June 15, 1907, Soper, her persecutor, published his investigation in JMA, Journal of the American Medical Association. It was there that the term Typhoid Mary first appeared, which later stuck to the Irishwoman tightly. It is not surprising that when George came to Mary on the island with an offer to write a book about her, she simply did not talk to him. Mallon locked herself in the bathroom and didn't come out until Soper left. Neither persuasion nor promises of worldwide fame and good money from the sale of books helped. On the island, the Irishwoman regularly passed all examinations, felt well. Interestingly, the tests were either positive or negative. Then Mary, depressed by being in captivity, turned to an independent laboratory, from which the conclusion came that she was healthy. Grasping this certificate as a straw, Mallon began to seek release. Tired of the endless struggle with the restless patient, the doctors decided to release Mary from the island. But not just like that. Mallon was promised that she would never approach someone else's stove again and would take all possible measures not to infect people around her. Mary swore under oath that she would comply with sanitary and epidemiological standards. On February 19, 1910, she was released and returned to the mainland. Back in New York, Mary began to think about what she should do next. There were few options. An uneducated girl could only work as a laundress. Alas, washing clothes brought many times less money than cooking. Nevertheless, Mallon continued to observe all the rules of hygiene and did not remember about cooking. However, working in the laundry was more like hard labor and eventually became unbearable. Mary, like thousands of other women in the early 20th century, every now and then there were fractures, burns, dislocations, problems with the spine and joints. Unable to withstand the hardships of life that had fallen, Mary increasingly recalled carefree times in the kitchen. Finally, in desperation, the Irishwoman changed her name to Mary Brown and went back to work as a cook. Returning to her usual life, the girl seemed to have completely forgotten all the precepts of doctors. Unfortunately for the unsuspecting new owners, Mary again forgot about personal hygiene, and in order not to be caught, she often changed jobs. A trail of typhoid outbreaks followed her again. This time the police knew who to look for, but the woman's new surname complicated the task. The trail of Typhoid Mary was attacked only in 1915. By that time, the 46-year-old Irish woman came to work at Sloan Women's Hospital, where she managed to infect at least 25 people. Glory on the bones. On March 27 of the same year, Mary was again sent to the well-known birth.The Island, but this time without the right to release. Typhoid Mary became a local celebrity. Dozens of journalists came to the island to interview her, and Mallon complained to all of them that the authorities had condemned her to a life of solitude. Mary still did not recognize herself as a carrier of the disease and refused any methods of treatment. Because of this, visitors were strictly forbidden to touch the Irish woman and take anything from her hands. By 1922, Mary was allowed to work as a nurse in a local laboratory, and 3 years later she was promoted to a laboratory assistant. Now instead of ducks, she washed test tubes. At the age of 63, Mallon had a stroke, after which she was half paralyzed. and 6 years later Typhoid Mary died from pneumonia. The autopsy showed that Mallon's gallbladder really contained a huge amount of typhus bacteria, which did not touch the hostess, but created a real branch of hell on earth for those with whom she came into contact. Because of her irresponsibility, Typhoid Mary almost gave birth to a real large-scale epidemic in New York. No one knows the exact number of people infected with the Irish virus. The number of deceased patients is also unknown. Historians believe that the infection from Mary was picked up by hundreds of people, of whom about 50 people died. Alas, due to the statute of limitations, we will no longer be able to establish the truth. One thing is clear: the story of Typhoid Mary teaches us that an irresponsible attitude to one's health can turn into a tragedy for many.